Abracadabra, boom shaka day. I'm NMA, and I'm back like a vertebrae. And today, I finished watching Season 3 of BoJack Horseman, which was definitely my favorite season so far, for a couple of reasons. Like, the main theme of this season was the main theme of the show. I guess it is kind of the main theme of every season, but it was certainly reinforced harder than ever over the course of this one. And that's just that things aren't changing the way that you are expecting them to. You have certain expectations with a story. We're used to seeing things pan out in a very particular way. You're used to having payoff and development and sort of a sense of progression following the emotional climax, which takes the story to a new place. And kind of it's like, oh, where's it gonna go next? But this one doesn't really have that. But over the seasons, over the course of the season, there's like a ton of things, like different characters and events and just various factors building up for like this big elaborate piece of development at the end, and like feels like there's a super satisfying ending in there somewhere. But instead of watching like some awesome finale play out and perfectly resolve itself, you get a gut punch that this is supposed to be a real show about real people, and real people don't always get better, but they do always die. Like that was a thing in this season. Someone straight up died. Not really because of BoJack. I mean, he put it on himself, but and I mean, you see what he's saying, and at least he did seem to feel some sort of genuine guilt, at least more genuine than usual when she died. But character straight up died because BoJack just tore her down into the abyss of excessive drug abuse with him, because he was just on a bender and he was sort of going down the checklist. A lot of people started to abandon him this season, as happens every season, but they always seem to find their way back to BoJack. A lot of people, like, Todd, there was some separation this season. There was some separation from him and Princess Carolyn because of the introduction of the character that is Anna, really long last name I don't remember the particulars of. And basically, BoJack starts to lose Diane as well. And Mr. Peanut Butter is preoccupied with something else. So, and the director from the last season, like, BoJack's losing a lot of people, so he just goes down the list of side characters that he might be able to talk to get some like short-term validation from until like his friends come around, like always, And he goes down to Sarah Lynn at some point, who the extent of his interaction with typically boils down to just violently irresponsible drug use, and so he engages in that until he, inadvertently causes her to overdose in the planetarium, like you do. And it was sort of it should have been a rude awakening for BoJack, but it was really just the end of an arc of him trying to make some sort of phony amends for everything that he's done to these people, and just like forget, and move on. But he gets kind of reminded at the end. It's like, oh, well, you can't really just forget, and, move on forever, because eventually there is an end to these things. And, you're not always going to get another chance. There's going to be a lot of opportunities where the people you're around aren't as cartoonish as, like, Todd and sometimes Princess Carolyn. And they're not going to stick around, despite you being totally unreasonable for vast stretches of time and not considering their feelings whatsoever. So that's definitely a bit of an interesting dynamic from this season. I noticed it kind of reminds me of some analysis video I watched about Xavier Renegade Angel back in the day that said that part of the appeal of the show is that he distinctly ends up in a worse spot by the end than he was at in the beginning. Which is typically the opposite of how you're, supposed to go about just structuring a story on a basic level that has characters in it. So it definitely reminded me of that, because BoJack does seem to always end up worse off than he used to be. And not even necessarily in his situation, because his situation kind of, it ebbs and flows. Sometimes it's looking up, sometimes it's looking down. But you as the viewer just, you lose more and more hope that things are going to start going right. I got by the time he was having his 15th sexcapade with a side character, I was kind of like, yeah, all right, Bojack, you just get on with it, let's just do this, whatever. Let's just get this part over with. I know how it's gonna end, and it ended exactly the way that I thought it was gonna end, with that character, Anna in particular. He had a relationship with her, that was mostly sexual, and he was it was super professional, sort of like a foil to his dynamic with Princess Carolyn. And she wanted to keep it at an arm's distance, but he wanted something real, some real connection, and he probably just searched for it within her because he knew it would never work out. He knew it would be at an arm's distance, so he was just able to sort of convince himself that he was being honest and he was looking for something more intimate, like something along the lines of love, because he knew it would never come to fruition because of who she is and because of his knowledge of his own track record with women. So she was a great character to introduce in the season. And I'm trying to think. I have some bullet points written down here. Yeah. The fact that the girl whose catchphrase is "That's too much, man," overdosed. She died of taking too many drugs, too much drugs. Thought that was kind of funny. Yeah. There was multiple mentions in this season of nihilism, floating rock theory, as I call it. We live on a floating rock, and nothing matters. We're empty vessels chained to a piece of cosmic dust, floating aimlessly throughout this meaningless ocean of the universe. And it's just whatever. It's always true, but it's something that people just like to selectively bring up and selectively consider in their head when making decisions that they want to or don't want to make. Because in reality, it's something that's always in the back of pretty much everybody's minds, unless you're super staunchly religious, I guess. And even then, it's always in the back of everybody's mind. And, typically, people just bring it out whenever it's convenient for them to fall back on, A lot of times that's just, when you want to do nothing and you don't have any motivation, you feel lazy, that's kind of when you fall back on something like that. But at the end of the day, it's always also kind of hard to argue against because, in a lot of ways, it is true. But, screw all that, because that's the path of death. And I'm looking towards the path of life, baby. I'm looking towards the path of continuing to talk about this video and not just kind of continue to talk about this season of BoJack Horseman and not just kind of letting the night pass me by. Ooh, I just got jump scared by something. So, according to me, I'm gonna ruin this video real quick, because according to me, somebody with no credentials whatsoever, who's a teenager, who has never written a story, hasn't seen really any of the most unanimously acclaimed television series or even movies of our era, or any era for that matter, I'm going to say it. I think the character writing in this show is on par with that of March Comes In Like a Lion, which is my favorite show ever. And that's really high praise, because that show's amazing. Seriously, amazeballs. So, and it kind of has the opposite. The thing I didn't like about March Comes In Like a Lion, it was kind of the opposite of BoJack, where it dealt with really a couple of similar characters and character arcs and stuff of that nature, but it was much more A, hopeful, and B, sweet. It was almost too sweet to a fault at times, to where I couldn't buy into it. And this is almost the opposite. It's so cynical, it can be definitely somewhat tiring to watch these same things play out over and over again. But there's enough interesting B plots with the side characters that sort of keep you occupied while BoJack sort of repeats this cycle with like a new quirk each time. But yeah, just in terms of like how elaborate the like character interactions and character dynamics are, and how they are very intentionally built up throughout the season, and how they like come apart and then come back together by the end of it. It's all very good. It's all very, very impressive, and I would probably have to think really hard if I were to give you evidence as to some point in the show where it happened. So yeah, I definitely appreciate that. That was most evident in this season for sure. And I mean, this season was sort of about, they're all about it, but this season was sort of about the fact that nobody's really developing. Like, people are making small steps, in some ways, but you don't know if, like, some characters end up having taken a step forward. Some haven't taken a step back, but no matter which way they took a step, I'm not sold into I don't buy into the idea that they're going to continue to step in that direction necessarily in the next season. So I don't necessarily feel like anybody's profoundly better off than they were, except maybe like Anna, because she's the one who just totally detached herself from BoJack, who just sort of is like a leech who ruins everything pretty much, because he's pretty terrible. He has redeeming qualities, and he has some people who are like stuck on him. But overall, it's like, come on, man, it's BoJack. He just kind of does ruin everything, and that's why it's interesting. There's like a bit of a motif, especially towards the middle part of the season, about the good guys winning or whatever with Rutabaga and Vanessa Gecko. And it's like, well, from the show's perspective, they're the antagonists, and they definitely do like shady and sleazy things, but so do almost all of the main characters. And it's like, you could pretty easily put yourself in the shoes of somebody who would be rooting for those characters had they been written to be a bit more charismatic to the audience, for example. But it's just kind of it just kind of puts everything into perspective that this is just kind of a BoJack isn't really entitled to any of this, None of these characters are necessarily entitled to any of this more than any other. It's just that I'm emotionally invested in them because I'm watching the show about them, and I'm relating to and projecting myself onto them. I don't know. It's just a cool thing that gets put into perspective. It's not really belabored too much in the show, and it's probably better that it is that way. Oh man, there's so much. There was just so much that went down. This season had a lot more like experimental episodic structures. Like, they went non-chronological for like, I think it was like episodes 9 and 10 or something were like flipped chronologically. There was that like underwater episode that had no dialogue. There was like the episode where they talked about how it was an experimentally structured episode in the dream sequence. I think it's episode 11 before Mrs. What's her name dies. God, what is her name? I'm not going to remember her name. I definitely know it. It's definitely in my brain somewhere, but I just can tell I'm not going to get it right now. I mean, I just heard it like a million times. Whatever, it's fine. God, now I gotta look it up. It is, Mary One appears. Let's see, Diane Wynn. Gosh. Sorry for this abrupt, just total, like, blah section. Sarah Lynn. That was her name. Before Sarah Lynn dies. Sorry, I just had to do that for myself. They were talking about, literally, like, in a meta sense, how the episode was experimental and how, it might lose some viewers over. But, it ends with a wistful, wordless, sort of vague, hopeful sentiment about the indomitable human spirit and how you just keep going even though nothing has really changed all too much. like, I think my favorite example of it throughout this one is throughout the season is like, so Princess Carolyn stops being an agent and she becomes a manager by the end, which is essentially a really roundabout way of just staying where she is. BoJack is BoJack. He does what he always does. I don't even have to go into that. Todd gets $1 million and then he loses it all. And so now he's like essentially back at it. It's like, oh, he even made a joke like, oh, how will this change the dynamic? And I kind of figure, I'm like, well, I kind of figure it won't, except for maybe for like one episode or something, like temporarily, and then it'll sort of resolve itself in a comedic way. And then, it did, and Todd's totally fine. There was also Diane breaking her arm. And she was wearing a cast the whole season. It was like a cool little through line throughout the show, as like a visual representation of chronology and like development and like the effects of the decisions being made actually having a lasting impact. And then she gets the cast off, and then she breaks the same hand again like an episode later, and she has a whole big ass B plot with Mr. Peanut Butter, but that is like its own whole entire other can of worms to get into for the most part. Which I think the next season is truly going to be a season of Diane, just based on how the show seems to be setting it up. She had her beef with BJ. She sort of temporarily speaking, she sort of detached herself from him in the sense that her character arc isn't necessarily intrinsically tied to his own, which seems to be the way the show's trending, because as it continuously reinforces BoJack's sort of like hopelessness at being able to improve, it sort of branches out into some other characters with more promising futures and starts to explore them, and how their character arcs are influenced by being around somebody like BoJack. So it's sort of that's how they keep it fresh with such a decently experimental and difficult concept to write around. So that's really cool. It's just kind of it can be sad to watch, but usually I'm watching it and I'm just like, okay, buddy, like, all right, we get it, buddy, like, all right, yep, we get it, buddy, yep, we know it's gonna, all right, buddy, yep. And then it happens, and you're like, okay, buddy, well, who would have guessed that would happen, buddy? And, as I'm sitting there just, like, repeating the word buddy to myself, I just sort of, I just kind of realized, I don't really like BoJack that much anymore as a character. I'm kind of glad that they're branching out into other ones. And I think there's no way of avoiding that, frankly. It's not that I don't like him as a character and I don't respect where he's gone and like the deep characterization that he's gone through. But in terms of seeing his story like develop and move forward, I'm not actually like overly concerned with it at this point. But hey, I'm open to being surprised for sure, because this show has delivered continuously and to greater effect each time. And proving that it has really good character writing. I mentioned earlier that it was on par with my favorite niche anime series, so that's some high ass praise, pretty much. Yeah, we all feel like BoJack sometimes, We all feel like we're just ruining everyone around us, and like everybody would be better off if they had never met us. But even like thinking those thoughts is probably like in some sense selfish. And then it's like, oh no, well, okay, I'm just being selfish anyway. God, I can't escape being selfish. This must just be like the core and totality of who I am as a person. And then you start just getting in your own head and you're like, oh man, I'm going to get in my own head. This is a cycle. It's going to keep going on no matter what. And then you're like, oh, okay, well, if it's just a cycle, it's going to keep going on no matter what. I have to somehow dissociate from it. And then your like path to dissociation is like, oh, well, nothing matters at all, blah, blah, blah. And then you start thinking about all the decisions you've ever made and like painting them through that light. And then you start thinking about the morality of everything you've ever done and how you're not always considering the idea of morality in and of itself. And then that leads you to feeling guilty as a person, and even worse about yourself in the long run. And then typically you just cry and go to bed. But yes, that was all pretty much covered here, unless I was just massively projecting. But yeah, it was pretty good. It's pretty good. I liked it. I liked it. It's a humble series.